we are dealing with a crisis of anti-scientific thinking that is manifested in anti-science rhetoric. Nag-manifest ito sa iba't ibang mga paraan. Sa United States at sa iba pang mga Western na bansa, nagkakaroon ng anti-vaxxers movement wherein they are saying that vaccines cause other harms sa mga katawan natin. Tulad ng vaccines cause autism or that vaccines can actually kill you. In the Philippines, our experience with Dengvaxia and the COVID vaccines has produced what is called vaccine hesitancy para sa Pilipinas. Maaring hindi natin gusto yung mga tatak ng mga bakuna na itinurok sa atin for some reasons or another. Pinakamalala, there are seemingly politicians who speak about science while not knowing the scientific method or the basics of scientific communication. The question that we have to ask ourselves right now is that as rational beings and as citizens of a democratic country, do we have a moral obligation to uphold and defend scientific thought? In this case, I argue that yes, in total, we actually do, since the promulgation of anti-scientific rhetoric is merely symptomatic of deeper issues that are all worth responding to. In our analysis, we have to look at what really is the source of the anti-scientific rhetoric. Isa sa mga nagiging source ng anti-scientific rhetoric ay yung strength ng tinatawag natin na anecdotal fallacy. It is much easier to listen to and believe in stories than it is to do the same for cold facts. Stories create a relational element to the information that we are presented with, while when presented with facts, they can feel distant. This is manifested, for example, in cases wherein a person, otherwise scientifically minded and perhaps well-educated, can be hesitant regarding getting the COVID vaccine because they knew someone who was related to someone that got the vaccine and developed a serious health-altering condition after. In philosophy, this is called the anecdotal fallacy, aside from the obvious post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy there. Fallacies are often shortcuts in thinking that can and often do lead us to false or at least misguided conclusions. That is to say, pag sinabi nating fallacious ang pag-iisip ng isang tao, maaari na meron tayong logical jump na ginawa na hindi dapat natin ginawa. We may have, or maybe we should have, investigated for further reasons kung bakit nangyari yung conclusion, and aside from just jumping na because this happened before that, yun yung nangyari. Cognitively, this is something almost ingrained in our consciousness. Because we have pattern-seeking brains, we retain information better if they are presented with a relatable structure. This is even used by memory experts to remember large amounts of information, o yung mnemonics nga na tinatawag. Say a sequence of words that are not related na pwede nilang tandaan o mas maalala ng mas maayos if there are some associations made between these words and a structure built around them. That is why maraming mga taong nakakapagkabisado ng mga tula at ng mga script, pero wala atang nagkakabisado ng dictionary. However, in philosophy and in law, anecdotal evidence rarely holds up on its own as a strong justifier of belief. Hence, proper, or that is to say, logical thinking, demands that we be wary of our own thoughts, of the cognitive biases made by our own brain, as they can muddle our own reasoning. Sir Francis Bacon, the philosopher who we attribute the development of the scientific method to, identifies these as part of the false idols that block our access to better reasoning. He developed the scientific method precisely to combat these idols. The second source of strength ng anti-science rhetoric ay yung tinatawag natin na warping and weaponization of what we call multiple truths. So let's talk a bit about another concept in philosophy, postmodernism. As a concept, postmodernism and postmodernity is a very broad descriptor that has temporal and thematic relevance. In one of its original definitions, postmodernity is characterized as an incredulity towards metanarrative, or this broad disbelief that there exists large sweeping generalizations that explain all that there is to say about a certain thing. This observation was made parallel to the rise actually of computers. Knowledge can come from many sources and not just from the hegemonies of the universities and the libraries. Ito ay mula sa analysis ni Jean-François Lyotard mula sa The Postmodern Condition, a Report on Knowledge. Ideally, what this was leading to would be a democratizing step towards education. And for some fields, it definitely did. Voices of the marginalized were heard for the very first time. Nagkaroon tayo ng mga novel and radical perspectives that fuel a lot of the academe at this point. Marami sa mga alternative na perspective na ito ang nag-bear fruit at nagkaroon ng maayos na researches after. However, at some point, the people in power warped and weaponized these same concepts. Paano? One early symptom of this would be what Mocha Uson's role was during Duterte's administration. She expressly labeled herself as a blogger, not a journalist, because she repeatedly asserts that mainstream media is a biased machinery, and so on. Do we then say na to combat anti-science rhetoric, bloggers should be disempowered? On the contrary, I think that bloggers and ordinary people must be empowered actually to engage in truth. And examples of citizen journalism katulad ng Bayan Mo, Ipatrol Mo, or You Scoop. They must be empowered to speak the truth because of a desire to report the truth, and not to say a falsehood because they were paid to do so. Nung mga nakaraang linggo, involving Maggie Wilson at ilan sa mga influencers in TikTok and Instagram na mga nagpakalat ng targeted na malicious reviews tungkol sa kanya at sa kanyang brand. The troll and disinformation army that was heralded by the likes of Mocha in 2016 has had its effects reverberate not only in rational thought, but even in local and national politics. The third strength na pinupuntahan or pinanggagalingan ng anti-science rhetoric ay itong distrust in democratic institutions. From the first one, we see, okay, we believe stories more than we do fact. Pangalawa, naniniwala tayo na lahat ng mga tao ay may kanya-kanyang katotohanan at valid na sabihin yon. Nag-culminate ito sa pangatlo, yung distrust natin sa democratic institutions. Even when authorities and science communicators are trying their best to get the point across to combat this phenomenon, this may even actually exacerbate the problem depending on which institution is doing the talking. Say, a person from the Department of Health mula sa ating bansa is telling us that the vaccine, regardless of brand, is actually safe. However, the recipient of the message is someone who has a deep distrust of the government for very valid reasons. In the Philippines, corruption in the government is almost just simply a matter of fact. Everyone knows that corruption is real and that it happens on all levels, mula sa kotong sa kalsada hanggang sa corruption tungkol sa funds. Add to this other layers such as, why would I trust a Chinese brand when the virus itself also came from China? Doesn't this mean that this was a planned epidemic all along? O tulad nga nung sinasabi nila, #plandemic. Why would I believe the government official when we know that they can be paid to say anything? Na pera-pera lang naman lahat yan. How could I forget when during the time of the previous administration, an administration na ayaw ko, merong isang bakuna na nag-crisis, nagresulta sa crisis at did more harm than good. Of course, scientists from this university would say that because they hate the government. See, it is not necessarily the case that people believe the anti-science rhetoric because they are anti-science themselves. Rather, the sources from which we supposedly get this from may have been unworthy of their trust. Combating anti-science rhetoric, or rather, reasserting trust in effective and mass-oriented science education and communication, is not just part of doing the good thing, but they are part of the ongoing struggle in building a truly democratic society. While we may have started this discussion with the anti-science rhetoric and how it can be dangerous, we can see how it can actually be a manifestation of larger and deeper problems in democracy and in the institutions that protect democracy, especially as it relates to both the individual acting as a rational agent or in the context of a shared social responsibility to uphold and protect science and democracy itself.